Is this the place we to meet Captain Brown?
Yes, Shields. At this stone quarry. We must take care that no one sees us. We're not far from slave country. I do not care to be pressed back into a servitude from which I have already escaped.
No, sir, I won't go back to being in chains. They'd have to kill me first, and I won't die without a fight.
Halt! Show yourselves.
Who are you?
Step forward and show yourselves.
How do we know you are a friend?
I mean you no harm, but I've got a sharp's carbine here. If you turn and run, I will shoot you down. Show yourselves.
Hold your fire. We are free men. You have no cause to molest us.
Douglas, is that you?
Captain Brown.
Not so loud, Douglas. The militia will hear. Mr. Douglas, it is good to see you again, sir. Providence has brought you safely to us.
Providence would have failed had your man been too quick with that carbine.
Allow me to introduce my second in command, Mr. John Henry Kagi.
Mr. Douglas, it is a pleasure. I'm an admirer of your writings and oratory.
Are you a good shot with that carbine?
Yes, sir, I am.
Then I'm pleased you held your fire, or you would neither read more of my writing nor hear more of my oratory.
Apologies for the fright, but we can take no chances. It is the nature of our endeavor. If we are ever discovered, our cause is ended before it has even begun.
Shields Green. I see, sir, that you have accompanied Douglas as I hoped you would. Pleases me greatly to see you again.
It's good to see you, Captain Brown. At first, I thought you might be slave catchers.
Shields, if our mission succeeds, there will be no more slave catchers. Our entire purpose is about the abolition of slavery. That's why we've asked you here to consider joining us.
We know that you are a fugitive slave, and that you risked a lot to join us here. We are honored that you have braved this night, Mr. Green.
Not many's called me Mr. Green.
In the company of John Brown and his men, there is no distinction between race or class. We are all equal in the struggle to rid this land of slavery.
I praise every day for slaves to be free. Back when I escaped from South Carolina, I left behind lots of folks who want their freedoms as much as me.
Do you still have family in slavery?
My Lucy was a slave. But she's not a slave no more. She's free. She passed on from a fever. After that, I stowed away on that there boat what brought me to freedom. But we the small boy I couldn't bring with me. I'd sure like my son to be free.
Shields, if our cause succeeds, your son will be free. John Henry, why don't you and Shields take a high point in this quarry and keep watch? Mr. Douglas and I have business to discuss.
Yes, Captain. Come along, Green. Let me show you how to breech load this sharp's carbine here, and you'll be able to take care of slave catchers yourself.
Sit, Douglas. I apologize, my furnishings have no upholstery. You must be tired from your journey.
Yes, I'm tired. And I do not mind the quality of your furniture. My years in slavery have inured me to hardship. I don't mind where I sit, as long as I sit a free man.
Did you raise any suspicions in your journey here?
I don't believe so. I was recognized in Chambersburg, but I gave a speech tonight at Franklin Hall, and the people believe that I am traveling as usual on my work for the American Anti-Slavery Society. Henry Watson is the only one aware of the true purpose of our travel. He put us on the road to this stone quarry and said you would meet us here.
Good. Well done. Watson can be trusted. He's worked the Underground Railroad for years, and he's helped us store arms until they can be moved to Maryland.
Maryland? What need have you for arms in Maryland?
My base of operations is a farm I rented in Maryland near the Virginia border. But I'll have more of that for you later. First, how are Anna and the children?
They are well. Anna is the cause of my freedom, and I could not do this work without her support. Though at times she grows weary of my constant travel away from home. Our youngest Annie is 9. I believe she is a great comfort to her mother. She keeps Anna's spirits from flagging. How is your family?
Oh, they are well, if not prosperous. We Browns have never learned how to make money. But we get by. Mary's at the farm in North Elba. She sends her regards. We're in regular correspondence.
And please send her mine. I remember her well from our first meeting at your home. She served me the most pleasant home-cooked meal. I was much comforted by the warmth of your hearth and the warmth of your family. I was greeted and welcomed by every member present, and it had its effect on me.
Mary will be pleased when I tell her you said so.
Would that we could trade these cold stones for that warm hearth and family now.
I find it difficult to be at ease when there are slaves with no warm hearth, and no family that cannot be violently torn from them by cruel masters.
Captain Brown, I've never known another white man who hates slavery as much as you do.
John Brown, though a white gentleman, is in sympathy a black man, and is deeply interested in our cause, as though his own soul had been pierced with the iron of slavery.
I remember writing that after we first met.
I deem it the highest praise I've ever received. Slavery is an abomination. It's the sum of all sins. I will use every resource, every ounce of muscle, every drop of blood that God has given me to fight slavery and slave owners until this blasphemy is purged from this land.
I see the 12 years since we first met has done little to dampen your zeal for the slave.
Oh no, my zeal increases day by day. Have these 12 years changed you, Douglas?
I believe I was changed the first night we met. I previously held with abolitionists like William Lord Garrison that moral suasion was the way to end slavery. I've lost faith in that method. The hearts of slave owners are made of a flint that is not softened by moral suasion.
Slavery is a state of war. Wars are not won by words. Every day the slave is violently attacked without provocation. And by this attack, the slave owner has forfeited his rights to life and property. The slave is entitled to strike back with any force necessary to gain his freedom and to requisition whatever property or wealth of his master that he requires. This is not plunder. This is payment due. This wealth has been amassed from the sweat and toil of the slave. The slave is entitled to it. The Bible commands me to defend the poor and fatherless, deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked. This is my duty. I will not shrink from it.
No, Captain Brown, I don't believe you will. You never have for as long as I've known you. 5 of your sons have settled here in Kansas to help establish it as a free state. At the abolitionist convention in Rochester, you asked me if you could make an appeal for money to arm the free staters. Many at the convention were opposed to armed conflict until you read that letter of appeal from your son.
Dear Father, I tell you the truth when I say that while the interest of despotism has secured to its cause hundreds and thousands of the meanest and most desperate men, armed to the teeth with revolvers, bowie knives, rifles, and cannon, while they are not only thoroughly organized, but under pay from slaveholders, the friends of freedom are not 1/4 of them half-armed. And as to military organization, among them, it nowhere exists in the territory. The result of this is that the people here exhibit the most abject and cowardly spirit whenever their dearest rights are invaded and trampled down by lawless bands. These ruffians boast that they can obtain possession of the polls in any of our election districts without having to fire a gun. Now, the remedy we propose is that the anti-slavery portion of the inhabitants should immediately thoroughly arm and organize themselves in military companies. Here are 5 men of us who are not only anxious to fully prepare, but are determined to fight. Now we want you to get for us arms. We need them more than we do bread. Your loving son, John Brown, Jr.
That letter had a remarkable effect. It loosened a few tears and a few purse strings. I recall we raised a sum of money.
I purchased a wagon load of rifles and drove straight through Missouri and into Kansas. Those rifles had more effect on the pro-slavery factions than all the moral suasion of the last 200 years.
Your daring and courage may yet be the cause of Kansas being admitted into the Union as a free state.
With the aid of God, I met with some success in Kansas. After we had armed the Free Staters and organized militias, we often won battles against superior numbers. But of all the victories God blessed me with, none pleased me more than the one on December last. Jim Daniels, a slave in Missouri, crossed the border into our camp to ask our assistance. We could not refuse him. He and his family were slated to be sold off. With a small band, we entered into Missouri and liberated 11 slaves. We took those 11 souls from slavery, but 3 months later, delivered 12 souls into Canada. Along the way, Narcissa Daniels gave birth to a strapping baby boy, John Brown Daniels. The namesake honors me. But what pleases me most is that John Brown Daniels will never know a day of slavery in his life. But while I had my work in Kansas, you've not been idle. I was most impressed when I read an account of a speech you gave on the occasion of the 4th of July.
Fellow citizens, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and national justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the case. I say it with the sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, but I must mourn. Above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wails of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. At a time like this, shocking irony, not convincing argument, is what is needed. Oh, if I had the ability and I could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out for you a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. It is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feelings of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all of your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are these people of these United States at this very hour. So go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without rival.
Captain Brown, the night grows darker and the roads are empty.
Good. I want you to hear what I have to say to our friend, Mr. Douglass. And Shield Screen, I want you to consider our words too. As you know, I've of late been about the business of raising money and recruits for my next venture.
I count amongst my friends many who have given money to continue your work in Kansas.
I may have mistakenly said Kansas when I meant Virginia. It is time to take this war into the heart of slavery. I have amassed arms and a company of men to attack and hold the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry. We intend to bring not light, but fire, not the gentle shower, but thunder, the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. With God to guide us, we will raise a cry of freedom that will be answered by every man, woman, and child who is cruelly held in bondage. We also expect our brothers in the north, white and black, to rally to our ranks. The time for this evil to end. We have stood by too long. What say you to this proposition?
Captain Brown, I am thunderstruck. My head is reeling. I need a moment to compose myself before I can answer.
Take all the time you need, my friend. What I am proposing is the culmination of both our life's work.
Captain Brown, when we first met, you laid before me your plan. With the hills and the mountains of Virginia as a fortress, you proposed to employ small bands of armed men in running off slaves, thus rendering the owning of slaves an unreliable and unsound investment. I held at that time and still hold that this plan has much to commend it. Have you abandoned it?
The time for that old plan is past. Piecemeal efforts to run off bands of slaves will have but little result. We could do that for the next 200 years and slavery will still be with us. I am not proposing the gradual erosion of slavery. I am proposing its death knell. Now is the time for a clarion trumpet blast that will announce to the slave that his friends have come and the long-awaited struggle has begun.
I cannot believe that such a rash and reckless plan as you now propose, a direct attack upon a federal arsenal, will advance our cause of abolition. It will array the entire country against us.
Of which country do you speak? I see two countries. I hold with the country of our revolutionary fathers who drafted the Declaration of Independence, throwing off the yoke of tyranny. I only propose to correct an oversight and extend its protections to all Americans of any color. I pay no allegiance to James Buchanan's pro-slavery government, which has given us the fugitive slave law. Shield Screen is in our company here in the free state of Pennsylvania. Yet the law offers him no protection. Slave catchers can come and take him back to slavery at any moment. And you know as well as I, Douglas, that you are just as likely to be kidnapped and forced back into slavery. All I am proposing is that Mr. Kagi and Mr. Green be allowed to nullify the fugitive slave law with Sharp's carbines. President Buchanan has offered a reward of $250 to any citizen who will deliver me to a federal marshal. I recently told an audience in Cleveland that I would give a reward of $2.50 for the safe delivery of the body of James Buchanan to any jail in the free states. I care not one whit if James Buchanan and his pro-slavery government are arrayed against me. They are arrayed against me now.
Captain Brown, I cannot disagree with any of the points you make. But Virginia is a slave territory. And I must tell you, I believe you'll be walking into a perfect steel trap. Once you're in, you won't get out alive. You'll be surrounded at once, and escape will be impossible.
I have anticipated as much. I plan to take a number of prominent citizens of the area hostage. If we become trapped, we can dictate the terms for our release.
How can you rest your plan upon a reed so weak and broken? Virginia will blow you and your hostages sky high rather than allow you to hold Harpers Ferry an hour.
I think you underestimate our potential.
How many men do you have now?
A handful, but more will join us soon. I'm expecting some men from Kansas. And Harriet Tubman, when last we spoke, was eager to join our cause and pledged to recruit for us. I have word that she has of late been ill, but I expect her to recover and join us in time. General Tubman will be a force that will draw many to our ranks.
I fear that even the remarkable Harriet Tubman will not be enough. At best, I see such little hope for success, and at worst, I fear that such an act as you now propose will only fasten more securely the fetters of our brothers in bondage. I still hold that your old plan is best. Why not abandon Harpers Ferry, return to your policy of gradually drawing off slaves to the mountains?
Because before anyone hears of our work, we will have been gradually surrounded and slaughtered. We will join the countless ranks of slave rebellions before and since Nat Turner that have been brutally crushed and forgotten. When we raid Harpers Ferry, the wire will carry the news to every part of the country. Our friends will be forced to choose where to cast their lot. I'm counting on enough casting with us to start a provisional government. This will be the first step in destroying slavery.
It is just here where I fear you make your most fatal miscalculation. Yes, some will be attracted. Yes, some will rally to your call. But the great mass of the citizenry will be repelled by an unprovoked attack upon a sleeping village.
200 and some score years of slavery is not enough provocation?
When the wire is sent, it will not declare an attack upon slavery. It will declare an attack upon an innocent and defenseless village. We cannot ignore the effect of our actions upon public sentiment. I tell you the truth when I say that now many support your actions in Kansas. But the killings you perpetrated at Pottawatomie Creek nearly undid all your good work.
I have heard enough about Pottawatomie Creek from milk and water abolitionists who have no stomach for what is required to end slavery.
You dragged 5 pro-slavery men from their cabins and hacked them to death with broadswords in the middle of the night.
As God is my judge, we shed no innocent blood.
Harpers Ferry will not surrender without a fight. Lives will be lost. Is there no innocent blood in all of Harpers Ferry?
I have instructed my men to only fire in self-defense, or if necessary, to free slaves.
Can you guarantee the safety of innocent civilians?
This is war. I am not bent on taking lives. I am bent on freeing slaves. I did not create this war. And I will do the best I can to keep loss of life to a minimum, but there are more casualties in this war. Casualties that are of more concern to me. 4 million casualties whose hearts and souls are murdered every day, and no one lifts a hand. Babies that are torn out of their mother's arms every day, and no one lifts a hand. Flesh that is scourged and burned every day, and no one lifts a hand. We have stood by too long. Too long. I will not stand before my Maker and tell him that I failed to act to free his children from slavery. It is time for this evil to end. And you want to quibble with me over the deaths of 5 men at Pottawatomie Creek? Brother Douglass, I fear you are too concerned with a mote in my eye and not enough concerned with the beam in the eye of slave owners.
I find myself on strange ground in this debate. You recount to me the atrocities of slavery to stir me to action. It appears that you are more willing to act on my belief than I am. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps the death of slavery requires the bold stroke of a sword. And yet, I still cannot shake the fear that this will be another Pottawatomie and only hurt our cause. How can such deeds be justified?
You weren't at Pottawatomie Creek, Douglass. You weren't there. Every word that my son John wrote in his letter was true, and more. Free State men had been murdered in cold blood by pro-slavery forces, and their murders gone unpunished. The Free State town of Lawrence had been sacked, looted, the Free State Hotel burned to the ground. Free State settlers were constantly harassed by the illegitimate territorial government elected by Missouri ruffians. Free Staters could expect their fences to be torn down, the crops trampled, the livestock run off. A Free State man could take his case to court and recognize men on the jury who had destroyed his farm. After his case is dismissed, he can watch the judge ride away on the horse that had belonged to him the night before. There was no law in Kansas. War had been declared on Free Staters. They wanted a war they could bring to us, but that we could not return. If we did not respond, they were only more emboldened. We resolved to not let their acts go unpunished. The men we executed at Pottawatomie Creek were not innocent. If the blood was not on their hands, they knew of and harbored those whose hands were drenched in Free State blood. I am in my 60th year, Douglass. God will judge me soon enough. But I will not be judged by you, not by any man. Perhaps I do not know your measure, Douglass. Perhaps your freedom is enough for you while your brothers and sisters languish in chains.
Sir, your words stab me.
I have heard your eloquent and passionate pleas for the whirlwind, the storm, the earthquake. Why do you refuse to act?
We both desire the end of slavery. Though I do not agree with your course, you do not hate slavery more than I do. You have only witnessed the scourge of slavery. I have felt it upon my back. I was born a slave. My father was a white man who was not known to me, and if he was known, would neither love me nor claim me. I never knew my poor mother, except for hasty and infrequent visits in the middle of the night, because she was of more value to her master in the fields. She would come and lay down with me. But when I awoke, she was already gone to walk the 12 miles back to the fields. My dear grandmama raised me, except I was torn from her hands at the tender age of 6 to go live in old master's house and to witness all the atrocities of slavery. I watched my dear Aunt Hester be bound and whipped bloody to an inch within her life. At 16, my master decided it was time to break me. I was for a time loaned out to Edward Covey, a notorious slave breaker. He laid his whip to my back often and for no cause. I was reduced to the state of a brute, and in my despair, thought about ending my life. I was resolved to never be beaten again. They could kill me, but they would not beat me. At Covey's next attempt to beat me, I held him off till he grew tired of the struggle. And he left me alone. He never laid a finger on me again, nor did he report me to the authorities. Not because he thought better of it, but because he knew. If he did, his reputation of being a slave breaker would be ruined. As I grew to be a man, I was determined to be free. You know the story of Anna and how she aided my escape. But what you may not know is the bitter disappointment to learn that white men in the North hate me just a little less than white men in the South. I've been spat upon and reviled, denied seat on coach that any white man wants, refused work and shelter, beaten, and my life threatened. I haven't received all of my scars in the South. In Indiana, I was beaten by a mob and my right hand broken. It was said poorly and still plagues me to this day. I'm not a large amount safer in free states than I am in slavery. But I have not and will not cease in my work in the struggle for my brothers and sisters. I am content with nothing for the slave short of equal and exact justice. I have given my life to this cause.
I am deeply ashamed, Frederick. I had no right to say to you what I did. I'm sorely disappointed if I cannot convince you to join us. That is my only excuse.
Your words cut me, Captain Brown. But it's a wound that will heal. I know your heart. Most white people suffer a disease of the soul which causes them to hate their brethren of a different skin. I have yet to find a cure for this disease, but I know you do not suffer it. You and Kagi and men like you have long ago stopped me from giving up on your race.
Oh, my hope is that when we strike, many men of my race and yours will rally to our ranks.
I do not agree with your course, but I do not doubt your love for those in chains. I've never seen you preach abolition to the crowd and then be repulsed to sit at a table with a black man as some white men do. That is why I consider myself your friend. You not only hate slavery, but you consider all men as your brothers.
My father was an abolitionist long before I was. He taught me that slavery is evil. My own experiences have only confirmed that teaching. During the War of 1812, I drove herds of my father's cattle to the army in the Detroit front. On one such drive, I stayed with a host who was most amiable and kind to me. He put me at a place of honor on his table and would tell his guests about what a clever lad I was at the age of 12 to be so far from home on a man's work. He owned a slave of about my age who was every bit my equal. This lad and I formed a fast and true friendship, as young boys often do. He was bright and quick, and I delighted in his company. I felt a strong kinship with this motherless slave, as my own mother had died when I was 8. I watched in horror one day when his owner, for some trivial excuse, beat him savagely with a fireplace shovel. The boy's cries and screams for mercy were still ringing in my ears as his tormentor turned to me with a smile, as if returning from the chopping of wood. I still hear those screams today. Though I could not then do anything for that poor motherless slave, I resolved that as a man, I would follow my Lord's commandments. The Bible teaches me, remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them, and them which suffer adversity. Hebrews chapter 13.
Your religion has always sustained you, Captain Brown.
My faith has sustained me. The Bible has sustained me. My religion has at times vexed me sorely. I will have no truck with churches that preach the gospel from the pulpit while reserving pews in the back for the darkest skinned in the congregation.
There is much hypocrisy that clothes itself in the name of the Christian church.
Oh, it is man's hypocrisy, not God's. Let your faith sustain you, Frederick.
Lately, I fear that I've been working harder at sustaining my faith than my faith has at sustaining me. If God sent the floods because he was grieved by the wickedness of the world, I fail to see what's holding them back now.
He promised no more water. He will send the fire this time. Join us, Frederick.
I see I cannot dissuade you from your course, Captain Brown. I fear I can be of little use to you.
That is where you are mistaken. For we need you now more than we do need bread. I want you for a special purpose. When I strike, the bees will begin to swarm. I shall want you to help hive them. Come with me, Douglas. I will defend you with my life.
I cannot. I tell you the truth when I say I know not if it is my discretion or my cowardice which compels me to deny your request. I fear you're marching to your death.
Your fears may be well-founded. I do not yet know what God has in store for me. But I hear the constant cries and lamentations of God's despised poor. They fill my waking hours and disturb my dreams. I see nowhere a kind hand offered to the friendless slave. I cannot refuse to act. If the shedding of my blood let slaves know that there are white men who love them, I will not have died in vain.
Shields, you have heard all we have said. You're free to choose. You can return to Rochester with me if you desire.
I believe I'll go with the old man.
Captain Brown, I fear I shall never see you alive again.
God be with you, Frederick Douglass.
God be with you, Captain John Brown.
On the night of October 16th, 1859, John Brown started on the road to Harpers Ferry with a company of 18 men. By midnight, the raiders had control of the 2 bridges into Harpers Ferry, the armory, the arsenal, and the rifle works. On Monday, local militias retook the bridges, cutting off escape. The next day, a company of 90 United States Marines arrived in Harpers Ferry under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee. They stormed the fire engine house where John Brown and the remainder of his men were barricaded. As John Brown lay wounded, various newspaper men and officials interrogated him.
Who sent you here?
No man sent me here. I came of my own prompting, and that of my Maker, or the devil, whichever you please to ascribe it to. I acknowledge no master in human form.
How do you justify your acts?
I believe, my friend, you are guilty of a great wrong against God and against humanity, and it would be perfectly right for anyone to interfere so as to prevent you from holding wickedly and cruelly and willfully those you hold in bondage.
Do you consider this a religious movement?
It is, in my opinion, the greatest service man can render to God.
Do you consider yourself an instrument in the hands of Providence?
I do.
On what principle do you base your acts?
upon the golden rule. I pity those in bondage that have none to help them. That's why I'm here, not to gratify any personal animosity or revenge or vindictive spirit. It is my sympathy with the oppressed and wronged, who are as good as you and as precious in the sight of God.
If you have anything further you would like to say, I will report it.
Only that I claim to be here in carrying out a measure that I believe to be perfectly justifiable. Not to act the incendiary or ruffian, but to aid those suffering a great wrong. I wish to say, furthermore, that you had better prepare yourselves for the settlement of this question, this Negro question, I mean, that must come up for settlement sooner than you are prepared for it. You may dispose of me very easily. I'm nearly disposed of now. But this question is still to be settled. The end of that is not yet.
John Brown was transferred to a jail in Charleston, 8 miles southwest of Harpers Ferry. He was tried, convicted of treason, and sentenced to hang.
I have, may it please the court, a few words to say. I have an objection. It is unjust that I should suffer such a penalty. Had I interfered in the manner which I admit, on the behalf of the rich, the powerful, the intelligent, the so-called great, or on the behalf of their friends, either father, mother, sister, brother, wife, or children, or any of that class, and suffered and sacrificed what I have in this interference, it would be all right. Every man in this court would deem it an act worthy of reward rather than punishment. This court acknowledges too, I suppose, the validity of the law of God. I see a book kissed here, which I suppose to be the Bible, that teaches me that all things whatsoever that men do unto me, I should do even so to them. It teaches me further to remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them. I endeavored to act up to that instruction. I say, I am too young to understand that God is any respecter of persons. I believe that to have interfered on behalf of his despised poor was not wrong, but right. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood further with that of the blood of my children, and with the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by cruel, wicked, and unjust enactments, I submit. So let it be done.
On December 2nd, 1859, John Brown was transported to the gallows. His jailer had been moved by his quiet dignity and courage while he awaited execution, and had treated Brown with deference and respect. As Brown left his cell for the last time, he handed his jailer his last written words.
I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed it might be done.
Less than 2 years after the events at Harpers Ferry, the Civil War began, and more than 500,000 lives were lost. After the war, Frederick Douglass gave a speech commending John Brown as a hero to the cause of freedom.
His zeal in the cause for my race was far greater than mine. It was as the burning sun to my taper light. Mine was bounded in time. His stretched beyond the boundless shores of eternity. I could live for the slave, but he could die for him. John Brown began the war that ended American slavery and made this a free republic. Until that blow was struck, the prospect of freedom was dim, shadowy, and uncertain. The irrepressible conflict was one of words, votes, and compromise. When John Brown stretched forth his arm, the sky was clear. The time for compromises was gone. The armed host of freedom stood face to face over the chasm of a broken union, and a clash of arms was at hand. The South staked all upon getting possession of the federal government, and failing to do that, drew the sword of rebellion, and thus made her own, not Brown's, the lost cause of the century.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah.